Welcome back everyone. Today we are diving into the latest numbers from a major public sector bank, Indian Overseas Bank or IOB. They've just put out their results for the final quarter and the full financial year.
Yes, that's right. IOB is one of the well-known public sector banks in India, headquartered in Chennai. They offer a wide range of banking products and services, and it's always interesting to see how these established players are performing.
Absolutely. So what are we looking at today? This is their audited report, right?
Yes, these are the audited financial results, covering both standalone and consolidated figures for the quarter and the financial year ended March 31, 2025. The Board of Directors approved these results in their meeting on May 2, 2025.
Got it. Audited results, standalone and consolidated for Q4 and the full year ending March 2025. Let's jump straight into the key financials. How did they do on interest earned for the quarter? Let's start with the standalone results, comparing year-over-year and quarter-over-quarter.
Okay, starting with standalone interest earned for the quarter ended March 31, 2025. It came in at 7,633.59 crore rupees. And comparing that year-over-year to March 2024's figure of 6,628.89 crore rupees, that's a noticeable increase.
Okay, a decent jump year-over-year on the standalone interest earned. How does it look compared to the previous quarter Q3 of this year?
Quarter over quarter, the standalone interest earned is also up. It was 7,111.72 crore rupees in the December 2024 quarter. So sequentially, they saw growth there as well, moving up to 7,633.59 crore rupees in Q4.
And how about the consolidated interest earned for the quarter? Same comparisons, year-over-year and quarter-over-quarter.
On the consolidated side for Q4, interest earned was 7,634.81 crore rupees. Year-over-year, that's up from 6,633.50 crore rupees in March 2024. Quarter-over-quarter, it's also higher than the 7,115.88 crore rupees reported in December 2024. So similar upward trend on both standalone and consolidated interest earned, both year-over-year and quarter-over-quarter.
Good start on the interest front. What about other income? Was that significant? Again, let's look at standalone first, year-over-year and quarter-over-quarter.
Standalone other income for Q4 FY25 was 1,581.10 crore rupees. Year-over-year, that's actually down quite a bit from 2,477.37 crore rupees in Q4 FY24. Quarter-over-quarter, however, it's up from 1,297.53 crore rupees in Q3 FY25. So a mixed picture there.
Interesting dip year-over-year, but a rise sequentially on standalone other income. What's the consolidated picture for other income in Q4?
Consolidated other income for Q4 FY25 was 1,622.79 crore rupees. Similar to standalone, this is down year-over-year from 2,479.17 crore rupees in Q4 FY24. But again, like standalone, it showed a sequential increase quarter-over-quarter from 1,299.46 crore rupees in Q3 FY25.
Okay, so total income combining interest earned and other income. Let's get the standalone figures for Q4, year-over-year and quarter-over-quarter.
Standalone total income for Q4 FY25 stood at 9,214.69 crore rupees. Year-over-year, this is slightly up from 9,106.26 crore rupees in Q4 FY24. Quarter-over-quarter, it saw a good increase from 8,409.25 crore rupees in Q3 FY25.
And the consolidated total income for Q4?
Consolidated total income for Q4 FY25 was 9,257.60 crore rupees. That's up year-over-year from 9,112.67 crore rupees in Q4 FY24. Quarter-over-quarter, it also increased from 8,415.34 crore rupees in Q3 FY25. So total income grew on both bases, year-over-year and quarter-over-quarter.
Now let's switch to the expense side. How much did they spend on interest, the interest expended, for standalone Q4? YoY and QoQ please.
Standalone interest expended for Q4 FY25 was 4,510.64 crore rupees. That's up year-over-year from 3,865.81 crore rupees in Q4 FY24. Sequentially quarter-over-quarter, It also rose from 4,322.78 crore rupees in Q3 FY25.
And consolidated interest expended for Q4?
Consolidated interest expended followed a very similar pattern. It was 4,510.42 crore rupees in Q4 FY25, up year-over-year from 3,867.77 crore rupees and also up quarter-over-quarter from 4,323.94 crore rupees. Costs of funds seem to be rising.
Makes sense. What about operating expenses? This usually includes employee costs and other operational spending. Let's look at standalone Q4 numbers, YoY and QoQ.
Standalone operating expenses for Q4 FY25 totaled 2,086.13 crore rupees. Year-over-year, this is significantly lower than the 3,279.34 crore rupees in Q4 FY24, likely due to high employee cost provisions in the base quarter last year. Quarter-over-quarter, it increased from 1,820.46 crore rupees in Q3 FY25.
And the consolidated operating expenses for Q4?
Consolidated operating expenses for Q4 FY25 were 2,087.62 crore rupees. Again, down year-over-year from 3,281.38 crore rupees in Q4 FY24, but up quarter-over-quarter from 1,823.78 crore rupees in Q3 FY25. The trend mirrors the standalone side.
So with income slightly up and operating expenses down year-over-year, let's look at the operating profit before provisions and contingencies. Standalone Q4, YoY, and UOQ.
Standalone operating profit for Q4 FY25 was 2,617.92 crore rupees. That's a strong increase year-over-year from 1,961.11 crore rupees in Q4 FY24. Sequentially, quarter-over-quarter, it also grew from 2,266.01 crore rupees in Q3 FY25.
And consolidated operating profit for Q4?
Consolidated operating profit for Q4 FY25 came in at 2,659.56 crore rupees. This is also up nicely, year-over-year from 1,963.52 crore rupees in Q4 FY24 and up quarter-over-quarter from 2,267.62 crore rupees in Q3 FY25. Good growth here.
Now, a crucial number for banks' provisions. How much did they set aside in Q4? Standalone first, YoY and QoQ.
Standalone provisions other than tax and contingencies for Q4 FY25 were 1,063.46 crore rupees. This is higher year-over-year compared to 767.66 crore rupees in Q4 FY24. It's also slightly up quarter-over-quarter from 1,028.64 crore rupees in Q3 FY25.
And consolidated provisions for Q4?
Consolidated provisions for Q4 FY25 were 1,064.22 crore rupees. This is up year-over-year from 767.56 crore rupees and also up quarter-over-quarter from 1,028.64 crore rupees. So provisioning increased in the last quarter.
Okay, after provisions we get to profit before tax or PBT. What does that look like for standalone Q4, YoY and QoQ?
Standalone PBT for Q4 FY25 was 1,554.46 crore rupees. That's a good jump year-over-year from 1,193.45 crore rupees in Q4 FY24. Sequentially, it also improved from 1,237.37 crore rupees in Q3 FY25.
And the consolidated PBT for Q4?
Consolidated PBT for Q4 FY25 stood at 1,595.34 crore rupees. This is up year-over-year from 1,195.96 crore rupees and also up quarter-over-quarter from 1,238.98 crore rupees.
And finally, the bottom line net profit after tax or PAT. Standalone Q4, YoY and QoQ comparisons.
Standalone net profit after tax or PAT for Q4 FY25 was 1,051.07 crore rupees. That's a solid increase year-over-year from 808.10 crore rupees in Q4 FY24. It also showed good growth quarter-over-quarter from 873.66 crore rupees in Q3 FY25.
Excellent. And the consolidated PAT for Q4?
Consolidated PAT for Q4 FY25 came in at 1,091.94 crore rupees. This is also up year-over-year from 810.42 crore rupees in Q4 FY24 and up quarter-over-quarter from 875.27 crore rupees in Q3 FY25. So strong profit growth across the board for the quarter.
That covers the quarter well. Before we move on, how did the full year numbers FY25 versus FY24 look for key metrics like total income and PAT on both standalone and consolidated basis?
For the full financial year 25, standalone total income was 33,676.08 crore rupees, up from 29,705.99 crore rupees in FY24. Standalone PAT for FY25 was 3,334.71 crore rupees, a nice increase from 2,655.61 crore rupees in FY24. On the consolidated side for the full year, total income was 33,750.31 crore rupees in FY25 compared to 29,730.97 crore rupees in FY24. Consolidated PAT for FY25 was 3,395.51 crore rupees, up from 2,665.66 crore rupees in FY24. So the full year also reflects healthy growth in both income and profit.
And the earnings per share EPS for the quarter and full year? Standalone figures first.
Standalone basic and diluted EPS for Q4 FY25 was 0.56 rupees, up from 0.43 rupees in Q4 FY24 and also up from 0.46 rupees in Q3 FY25. For the full year FY25, standalone EPS was 1.76 rupees compared to 1.40 rupees in FY24.
And consolidated EPS?
Consolidated basic and diluted EPS for Q4 FY25 was 0.58 rupees, up from 0.43 rupees year-over-year and 0.46 rupees quarter-over-quarter. For the full year FY25, consolidated EPS was 1.79 rupees, up from 1.41 rupees in FY24.
Okay, great. Moving to profitability insights. How do the margins look, especially comparing standalone and consolidated?
Looking at the net profit margin, PAT, divided by total income, for standalone in Q4 FY25, it's around 11.41%, which improved from 8.87% in Q4 last year and 10.39% in Q3. For the full year, the standalone net profit margin was 9.90%, up from 8.94% in FY24. The consolidated net profit margin for Q4 FY25 was around 11.80%, also showing improvement from 8.89% year-over-year and 10.40% quarter-over-quarter. For the full year, the consolidated margin was 10.06%, up from 8.97% last year. Both standalone and consolidated margins have improved, with consolidated being slightly better.
Any significant exceptional items impacting these results?
No. The reports don't list any exceptional items for either the standalone or consolidated results for the quarter or the full year. This suggests the profits we're seeing are from the regular banking operations.
Good to know. Let's touch upon the balance sheet. Any key highlights comparing March 2025 to March 2024, maybe deposits, advances, or net worth? Standalone first.
Okay, standalone balance sheet highlights as of March 31st, 2025. Deposits stood at 3,11,938.82 crore rupees, up from 2,85,905.38 crore rupees a year ago. Advances grew to 2,45,555.17 crore rupees from 2,13,318.81 crore rupees. And net worth increased significantly to 22,898.29 crore rupees from 18,069.18 crore rupees, boosted partly by the recent capital infusion.
And the consolidated balance sheet highlights?
The consolidated figures are very similar. Deposits were 3,11,938.82 crore rupees. Advances were 2,45,555.17 crore rupees, and consolidated net worth was slightly lower than standalone, but still showed good growth. The consolidated capital and reserve figures, excluding minority interest, total 32,233.35 crore rupees.
What about asset quality? Any improvement in NPAs? Let's look at the standalone ratios.
Yes, there's been a marked improvement in asset quality based on the standalone ratios. Gross NPAs as a percentage of gross advances decreased to 2.14% as of March 31st, 2025, down from 3.10% a year ago and 2.55% at the end of December 2024. Net NPAs also improved significantly to 0.37%, down from 0.57% a year ago and 0.42% sequentially. That's a positive trend. And the provision coverage ratio also stood strong at 97.30%.
That's definitely a positive sign. How about the cash flow situation for the full year?
Looking at the standalone cash flow statement for the full year FY25, net cash generated from operating activities was 2,963.19 crore rupees compared to a net cash use of 1,165.42 crore rupees last year. Net cash used in investing activities was 565.30 crore rupees. Net cash generated from financing activities was 117.95 crore rupees, mainly reflecting the capital raise activities, offsetting bond redemptions. Overall, cash and cash equivalents increased by 2,515.85 crore rupees during FY25. The consolidated cash flow showed a similar pattern.
Okay, let's dive into the segments. How did the different business units perform on the standalone basis? Treasury, corporate, retail?
On the standalone segment results for Q4 FY25, Treasury operations reported revenue of 2,246.99 crore rupees and a profit before tax of 398.05 crore rupees. Corporate wholesale banking had revenue of 2,454.67 crore rupees and a profit of 398.64 crore rupees. Retail banking was the largest revenue contributor with 3,889.45 crore rupees and also the most profitable segment with a profit of 1,279.51 crore rupees. The digital banking subsegment within retail is still very small, contributing minimal revenue and a slight loss. Other banking operations had revenue of 105.37 crore rupees and a profit of 23.66 crore rupees. This segment assets show treasury and retail holding significant portions followed by corporate. Capital employed is highest in treasury, followed by retail.
So retail banking seems to be the star performer in terms of profit contribution. How does the overall performance stack up, considering these segment results and the financials we discussed?
Overall, IOB has delivered a strong performance in Q4 and for the full year FY25. The key drivers are robust growth in net interest income, aided by healthy loan growth, advances up 15.6% year-over-year standalone, significant improvement in asset quality with NPAs reducing sharply and consequently lower credit costs compared to historical levels, although provisions did tick up slightly in Q4. The successful qualified institutional placement QIP of around 1,436.90 crore rupees in March has also strengthened the capital base significantly, with the capital adequacy ratio, standalone, improving to 19.74%.
You mentioned the QIP. Were there other significant events or notes from the report we should highlight?
Yes, several important points. First, the board approved plans to raise further equity capital up to 4,000 crore rupees and Tier 2 capital up to 1,000 crore rupees in FY26, signaling growth intentions. Second, they implemented RBI's new directions on investment portfolio classification from April 1, 2024, which involved adjustments to reserves. Third, their joint venture in Malaysia is in the process of winding up, the impact of which needs monitoring. The investment in their associate Odisha Gramya Bank, which has now been amalgamated into a larger RRB effective May 1, 2025, is accounted for using the equity method. Fourth, they highlighted a significant net deferred tax asset balance of 3,863.98 crore rupees and noted reversals made during the quarter, 500 crore rupees, and year 1,160 crore rupees. The auditors have added an emphasis of matter regarding this DTA balance and its recoverability assessment. Fifth, substantial contingent liabilities exist related to disputed direct and indirect taxes, although they received a large income tax refund during the year. Auditors also flagged the non-provisioning for these disputed taxes as an emphasis of matter. Sixth, they hold significant provisions against accounts admitted under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code (IBC).
Okay, that brings us to the auditor's report. You mentioned emphasis of matter points. Was the overall opinion clean?
Yes, the statutory central auditors issued an unmodified opinion on both the standalone and consolidated financial results for the year ended March 31, 2025. However, as mentioned, They included an emphasis of matter paragraph in both reports, drawing attention to Note 16 regarding the significant deferred tax asset balance and management's assessment of its recoverability, and Note 17 regarding the non-provisioning for disputed income tax and indirect tax liabilities based on management's view of likely success in appeals. They also included an other matter paragraph regarding the reliance on financial information from branches audited by other auditors and unaudited branches for standalone results, and reliance on financials audited by other auditors for the associate and unaudited financials for the joint venture in the consolidated results. The auditors for the security cover certificate also gave an unmodified opinion.
Understood. Unmodified, but with those important emphasis of matter points regarding DTA and tax disputes. So bringing it all together, what's the outlook for IOB?
Disclaimer: as always, investors should consult certified financial advisors before making investment decisions. The outlook for IOB appears cautiously optimistic based on these results. The bank has demonstrated strong profitability growth, significant improvement in asset quality, and has shored up its capital base through the recent QIP. Continued loan growth and improving margins are positives. Key risks include the potential impact of the disputed tax liabilities flagged by the auditors, the recoverability of the large DTA, managing the wind-down of the Malaysian JV, and the general economic environment impacting credit demand and repayment capacity. The successful management of NPAs needs to continue.
Right? So wrapping up on Indian Overseas Bank's Q4 and FY25 results. Solid profit growth, much better asset quality, and a strengthened capital base are the key positives. However, the emphasis of matter points from the auditors concerning deferred tax assets and disputed tax liabilities require close monitoring by investors.
Exactly. A strong operational performance, particularly on the NPA front, but those specific notes flagged by the auditors need to be kept in perspective when evaluating the overall financial health and future risks.
Thanks for that comprehensive breakdown. Very insightful. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in.